Thanks, Lindy. When you started talking about subconscious and getting in touch with your other side of yourself, etc., I started to get a little bit worried there because I think I've just spent 2.5 weeks on a beach, fishing, hunting and generally sort of doing that sort of thing. It's my first presentation. I'm a bit nervous that I might have forgotten how to speak about things like this. But anyway, let's hope that I can carry it for a few minutes. My name's Andrew Saniger. I teach the history of landscape architecture content in the undergraduate and the Masters of Landscape Architecture in the course. And I'm going to talk to you about the first year level of this subject called History of Landscape Design. The subject, well, first a little bit about me. My interest, of course, is in history and in particular landscape architecture as a profession and landscape design. But my book, as you can see on the screen here, was very much centred on the Australian profession of landscape architecture. Although, of course, I do teach, and the content of my course involves European history and American history, etc. I'm also interested in heritage and conservation, and so there's a little bit of the conservation side of landscape architecture involved in the subject, but it's more of plays a minor role, and the subject is more about history itself. A little bit about the structure of the subject. It's a 2-hour lecture per week with a 1-hour tutorial. The tutorials ideally, well, let me put it this way, as for the experience from last year, the tutorials were pretty much attended by students 100% of the time. It's a very important part of the course where you get assistance with the assignments, you discuss ideas with other students, and importantly, you discuss the lecture content. The lectures, as you can see on the screen, are also very critical, but they are captured with the lecture capture system. And so, ideally, you should be attending all lectures physically and only use lecture capture when you can't make it and you're sick, etc. But students, I find, do tend to sit in cafes on campus with their laptop, listening to me an hour after I've presented the lecture in person, which I don't get. Why wouldn't you come and be in the room one-on-one with the lecturer? The assignments involve fieldwork, an iPod tour and a sketchbook, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And there's a test at the end of the year, or a short exam, which is not centrally timetabled. It's something that I run within a lecture theatre, usually inside our building. The aims of the course are to provide a sequential history with an emphasis on precedents for contemporary landscape architecture. I include events, social influences, people, philosophies, theories, and of course, most importantly, projects. So we're going to look at a lot of designed landscapes from around the world. Although there is an emphasis on Western civilizations, I'm also going to include ancient civilizations through to the Middle Ages in the first couple of weeks of the course. And this is predominantly to provide information about important precedents that appeared much later on through time. But the predominant focus is from the Renaissance through to the 20th century. So we're going to be looking at the 1600s on through to the 20th century. Just before I move on to the next slide, I should say one of the main emphasis and one of the main aims of this course is to be able to explain the origins of forms like this in urban settings. This is Central Park in New York. I think you will agree, quite a dramatic statement within Manhattan, a massive park that's been defended from urban development, urban in the sense of built form, over many decades, or centuries in fact. And what we want to do by the end of the course is get to a point where you can understand and explain not only the design of that space, but the people who produce that space and the profession responsible for the production of that space. So, as I said, we will look at ancient landscapes through to the Middle Ages, Greece, Rome. What you're looking at on the screen is actually some images of Roman baths and Roman roads in the south of France. will incorporate materials such as this. And we'll also look at landscapes in Asia, in China and Japan. Of course you could run a whole course on this, but we're particularly interested in influences that reappear again later, particularly in the 20th century, when designers became very enthusiastic and very interested in some of the ways that societies or cultures in China and in Japan design landscape and appropriated those approaches. Of course, a very important part, we'll be looking at landscapes such as this, landscapes of the Renaissance and Baroque period, very grand and dramatic places like Versailles, but also, and also landscapes in the UK designed in a picturesque fashion. I'm very interested in things like this, the technology behind the design of these landscapes. What you're looking at here are ways of making dynamic gestures in gardens. Very, I think, intriguing methods of animating gardens using pulleys and wheels and forms of motion. So we'll be looking at not only plants and design elements, but also the structures that underpin that. And of course, Australia. This is a couple of images from a landscape in Western Australia designed by John Oldham. Given my interest and my research focus has been in Australian history, there'll be, of course, content from the Australian condition. Very quickly, an overview of the assignments. The first assignment includes measured drawings, sketching, and historical analysis using precedent. And although you'll see these images depict my students in desert landscapes, that I have been taking students out into arid regions of Australia and exploring landscape design in those sorts of places, I can't promise you that we will be doing desert trips within this particular subject, because it's a much smaller component of the assessment. But we will be looking at landscapes and how they've been designed and changed over time from the point of view of this measured drawing exercise. To give you an example, last year we looked at a site that's currently being restored on campus. It's a small part of a landscape of the South Lawn near the Value Library. You'll see here pictures of this particular part of the campus and how it's changed through time. And here are my students conducting a measured drawing exercise last year. This student obviously was too busy to have any involvement in the project, and very happy to let her colleagues do all the work. We'll also be doing an iPad tour. This is assignment number 2. You'll go to the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, and you'll download an app that I've designed with, in collaboration with a few other people. And you'll complete a 10% assignment out in the field walking through the Botanic Gardens. The main part of the assessment is a sketchbook, which involves analysing a number of gardens by theme or by place and making plans and making images. There's a large amount of tracing involved, so copying of plans and of course acknowledging those plans in terms of the sources and analysing what it is that you find when you explore the ideas or the theoretical premises of these places and what you can find in the literature. And of course the exam at the end of 30%. I hope that's been an adequate introduction. Thank you for listening and all the best with your future studies.